rage, hunger, greed, desperation, madness, cannibalism. Since ancient times, long before the British colonists reached the shores of the continent that would come to be known as America, many indigenous peoples inhabited the most numerous and unsuspected places of the continent. For many years, the film and entertainment industries portrayed these peoples as having ferocious and inhuman cultures, as savages who attacked without the slightest provocation and committed bloody massacres of women and children. However, contrary to this barbaric image, the inhabitants of pre-colonial America were people who respected and cared for their environment, fierce warriors, like loving guardians of the world around them. The first peoples of these lands sought to live in harmony with their land and the spirits that inhabited it. Even their main food source, the bison, was treated with the respect and veneration of a family member and a friend. A relationship these Aborigines had not only towards their prey, but towards the beings they might consider the closest thing to a human predator. The Wendigo, an evil and sinister spirit of the forests, a representation of the darkest and most aberrant passions and feelings of the human heart, a spirit that tore the sanity from its victims, forcibly penetrating their bodies and turning them into grotesque beings devouring human flesh. A creature with the power to overcome humans as easily as a cat overcomes a mouse, and from whom the original inhabitants of these lands managed to protect themselves thanks to the help of spiritual guides and shamans. Men capable of confronting this sinister spirit and protecting their people from its evil influence. Men like Jack Fiddler, the last hunter of the Wendigos. The Ogima was a figure of great value and importance among the native peoples of North America, leaders of the tribe and guardians between the earthly world and the world of spirits, where the power and strength of men is limited next to the beings of a universe that the human mind is barely able to comprehend or imagine. For these peoples, all things had a soul, and the spirits ruled the order of the world. Some benevolent and pious, others ruthless, merciless, and heartless, eager to sow chaos, pain, and madness among mortals, taking away their dignity and turning them into stinking cannibalistic monsters. Jack Fiddler, eldest of 3 brothers, father of 13 children, husband of 5 wives, leader and protector of the Sucker tribe, a proud and struggling indigenous people of the cold forests surrounding the shores of the Great Sucker Lake in Ontario, Canada, was tried in the 1900s for the death of someone whose true nature history has not been able to confirm. For many, it was considered a cold-blooded murder, clumsily disguised as an attempt to do the right thing. For some, as an unfortunate accident resulting from human custom and superstition. And for others, both for the Sucker people and for many of us who dare to imagine that there are sinister forces and beings in the world beyond our comprehension and understanding, a work as regrettable as it was necessary. The hunt for a deadly Wendigo. The preemptive elimination of a person possessed by the most grotesque and dreaded incarnation of hunger in Native American folklore. Born in the year 1839 as the eldest of 3 sons and under the native name of Zawano Zizhigo Guabo, which in the language of the Ojibwe, a native population to which the Sucker people tribe belonged, had a special and unique meaning. He who stands in the southern sky, and also by the name of May-Senanine or Mace-Northino, which in another Cree dialect means stylish man, led his people, guarding and protecting them from a very young age, and dedicating his entire life to this task, living day after day with the goal of guarding them from the dark danger that had haunted the icy forests of Ontario for decades, since the days when his father had watched over the people. There was nothing more important to this man during his more than 68 years of life, and no wonder, back then at the turn of the 19th century, the outlook was dark for the Sucker people, for more reasons than one. Actually, it had been dark for much longer. During these early decades of the 19th century, the Cree natives were indirectly pressured by the advance of Europeans on the continent. The settlers prospered and enriched themselves at the expense of the quality of life of the native peoples. And at the time, the HBC, Hudson's Bay Company, strongly encouraged the fur trade throughout the region, which initiated heavy and indiscriminate hunts against wildlife, a decision that would unleash unnoticed the gestation and growth of a sinister evil that would endanger the survival of the entire Sucker clan. As if invited by the hungry, greedy, ever-insatiable spirit of the Wendigo, the settlers hunted the wildlife with such ferocity that feeding the survival would become a total challenge for the Sucker people, long before Zawanoji's Higo Guabo, aka Jack Fiddler, was born. Known to us because of the oral tradition of the original peoples of North America, and starring in countless different tales and stories that have passed down from generation to generation over time, the Wendigo has numerous characteristics that vary from village to village, generation to generation, and even from individual to individual. Its appearance boasting differences depending on the region. From a huge hair-covered creature with a deer skull for a head, a description that corresponds more to recent modifications than to the stories of the original peoples of this continent, to the image of a pale and emaciated being with long limbs, a bony torso where the bones are frighteningly marked, sharp claws protruding from its fingers, and uneven teeth designed to tear flesh and cause more pain to the prey than to feed the predator. And there is one characteristic that never leaves the appearances of these macabre beings: the blasphemous act of cannibalism. The horrible action of when a man, whether driven by the pleasure of killing, the madness of war, or the atrocious and heartbreaking despair of hunger, feeds on the flesh of another in an attempt to appease his desperate appetite. Even certain legends say that the Wendigo's appearance can sometimes be as normal as that of any human being, at least in its initial stages, unmasked only by certain imperceptible details, sometimes retaining the ability to speak and think, while remaining the sinister, ever-hungry monsters that the primal inhabitants of cold Canada and the northern United States rightly fear. More than a few sources describe the Cree peoples adjacent to Sucker Lake as a group living in miserable circumstances, near starvation, without ammunition, nearly naked and cut off from any items that could help them with their survival. And it stood to reason that, during this time, when the competition for furs was so severe that the Sucker clan could barely get enough to trade and survive, the spirit of the Wendigo would haunt the frozen Ontario woods, threatening to possess the body of a hungry and desperate soul in an effort to turn him into that inhuman and insatiable beast that aroused terror. It was in these conditions of scarcity and hunger that the brothers Peter Flett, Joseph Fiddler, and the eldest Jack Fiddler grew up, the only male children of the former Ogima and leader of the tribe, Pima Chikag, a famous shaman, leader, sorcerer, and spiritual guide who, according to legends, mysteriously appeared out of nowhere as a sort of messiah sent to help the desperate Sucker people. According to numerous accounts, the origin of Pima Chikag, whose name actually meant porcupine standing sideways, is as mystical and supernatural as that of the beings he was sent to fight. One day, this man appeared on the roof of an elongated house without any person remembering having seen him before, or recognizing him as a member of the neighboring clans in the cold and inhospitable territory. His mysterious appearance, not as a child born among them or a young man coming from another area to protect them, but as a fully grown and fully developed man, generated a great commotion among the Aborigines, who, fearful of the inexplicable situation, asked him where he came from. And the story goes that Pima Chikag answered this question by saying, "My name is Porcupine Standing Sideways. I lived in this world before. Now I am here again. as if he were an ancestor sent from the spirit world to the earthly world to save the Sucker clan. Pimachigag immediately lived with his new group, immediately proving himself to be a gifted shaman, capable of visiting the spirit world at will, healing the sick, summoning animals in arduous times of scarcity, and protecting his people from the ever-hungry and insatiable Wendigo. One story tells of a black soul tribesman from the White Pine Arrows who lived among the Sucker and was almost always a cause of conflict and discomfort. His name is not known, but on one occasion, this man disappeared with his family during a hunting trip. On his return, as he was disembarking his canoe, Pimachigag approached him to discover to his horror that what this man was lowering from his canoe was not lumps, but the starving corpse of his son, who had not endured the journey. The man shouted and rebuked the shaman for intruding, as if he feared he had seen something he shouldn't have. Pimachigag would overlook it, but soon after the shaman's eldest daughter would die in a freak accident, which he would take as the first sign of a curse cast upon his people. His suspicions would be confirmed by the worsening conditions of that cold and precarious winter, the merciless hunger and despair of his people. Pimachigag would save them by means of a ritual, after ordering the deep cleaning of a hut, elaborating a false elk leg and gathering his people to choose which part of the elk they would like to eat. The next day, the shaman would choose a place to send the hunters, who would return with a strong, muscular elk to save them. A year later, the elders of the Sucker tribe, including Shaman Pimachigag, would fall mysteriously ill. Struck by a threatening fatigue, the villagers saw a horrible reddish light in the forest and heard the sound of horrible roars surrounding the village. Believing themselves to be doomed to fall at the hands of the Wendigo, they would be greatly surprised when the Ogma Pimachigag would rise from his bed and, sick and exhausted, would take an axe and a whip and march into the forest, where the roars of the beast, the cry of the whip and the force of an unnatural storm would shake the woods, bending and threatening to break the thick pines and thunder dancing among the black clouds. The scene would be just as terrifying for hours, with the whip of the Ogma never ceasing to be heard amidst the storm, until the storm ended and Pimachigag returned to the village with the monstrous Wendigo becoming his prey. Jack Fiddler, who adopted his name in part due to his efficiency in building quality fiddles and playing them in the squares and venues of the HCB, grew up under the instruction of his famed father, who taught him everything he needed to become the next Ogma, by learning how to deal with curses and the arts of mystical and spiritual healing, dream interpretation, and other shamanic arts, assisting his father until the fall of 1891, when his father passed away, thus inheriting his progenitor's responsibilities as leader of the Suckers. During his nearly 70 years of life, Zarmanuji's Higo Guabo boasted of having hunted more than 14 Wendigos and expelled the spirits of many more from his clan and other neighbors. It is told, on one occasion, a man named Wata, hunted by the Wendigo spirit, was released from his agony by the new Ogma. It is said that Wata growled and writhed like a trapped beast, lashing out with blows and bites as more men than necessary tried to contain a person of his size. Whoever he was, they barely contained him, and his insides froze to the point that the crackle of ice and frost inside his belly could be heard with each violent shaking of his body. But Fiddler managed to assert himself, running at full speed to the possessed man's tent and striking a couple of cans, releasing the screeching, thin chant of metal against metal, as his throat intoned a mystical chant, which would paralyze the spirit, giving Jack enough time to knock the possessed man down and free him from the sinister influence of the animal by means of his fists. The scene and its explanation might seem somewhat absurd and surreal. However, The moment the man tried to scream to ask the village guardian to stop, not a single sound came out of his throat. Only an icy, screeching blast of cold, deadly air. Fiddler would strike the man down and beat him with his whip until he was finally sure that the evil influence had left him. And this would not be the only instance in which Jack Fiddler gave the impression that he had defeated a fierce Wendigo. During these times, the Canadian government press reported numerous cases of indigenous populations suffering from starvation and extreme need, where in some cases, certain tribes resorted to cannibalism to survive. William Campbell was an experienced trader and in charge of one of the HBC posts that frequented with some regularity the natives of the Sucker clan. One day, a man frequenting his trading post was killed under accusations of being a Wendigo, and when Campbell reported the case, he received little attention from his superiors, who in those days were not overly involved in the affairs, customs, and habits of the natives. It was from Campbell, who had finally decided not to get too involved, that Sergeant Daisy Smith learned of the Wendigo cases. Unlike the trader, who, although uncomfortable, had learned to let the natives be, Sergeant Smith, a member of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, was horrified by the stories. In particular, a case in which Shaman Jack Fiddler was involved. Smith sent a letter to his superiors, which in December 1906 received a reply directing him to initiate a thorough investigation. In March 1907, Agent J.W. O'Neill joining Agent Cashman a month later and travelling to the adjoining regions of Sucker Lake, where they would meet two of Jack Fiddler's 13 sons, Robert and Adam Fiddler, with whom they discussed the Wendigo stories and other occurrences in the region. Jack's sons commented that, due to their father's advance in age, he would soon pass his role as Ogima and spiritual leader to Robert Fiddler. The agents invited the leaders of the Sucker clan to a large council that would meet in the summer near one of the nearby trading posts of the Hudson's Bay Company. The Suckers had suffered from a particularly harsh winter last year, as they had for quite some time. Cold, hunger, and scarcity were getting worse by the day. So, convinced that the meeting would bring advantages to the town and aware that any possible help would be favourable, they agreed to meet on June 1st at the trading post, where members of the neighbouring Cranes clan would also attend. The reason is not known. Perhaps it was mere chance. Perhaps a different date was given to each native village for the meeting. Whatever the case, the Suckers arrived a day after the Cranes, who were questioned by agents to investigate the situation in the area. Among them, the Wendigo murder cases. And it was one man, Norman Ray, who told the officers a terrifying story that would not only confirm the accounts that William Campbell told Sergeant Daisy Smith, but would also be a true horror story, a testimony to the plight of the helpless people of those icy, ghostly woods where spirits of despair, hunger, and madness were sure to haunt the anguished inhabitants every time the frigid winter knocked on the doors. In the fall of 1906, Norman Ray would arrive at a camp adjacent to Campbell's trading post, a place where, shortly before, Joseph Fiddler, Jack's brother, and his son Thomas would arrive in a canoe carrying what at first appeared to be a lump. Only, it was moving. Shaking with frightening ferocity, uttering incoherent cries and babbling, this woman called Wasikabikwe seemed never to exhaust herself, becoming more difficult to control with every second, as if her strength was growing progressively stronger. Her screams seemed unnatural, and she was bound hand and foot. Norman knew on the spot what was happening to this woman, so it took him no more than a few seconds to join the new arrivals, helping them subdue Wasikabikwe, who eventually fell asleep. None of them saw fit to do anything until the arrival of their Ogama and spirit guide, Jack Fiddler, who made an appearance the next day. Upon seeing her, Jack ruled that there was nothing to be done for her, and that the only hope was to kill her before she ended up turning into a ruthless beast, hungry for human flesh, capable of easily hunting and subduing any prey. Norman Ray was as sure as the others that what he was doing was the right thing, held tightly to the woman, who by his account was still asleep, and gave his utmost effort to immobilize her as Fiddler wrapped a rope around her neck and began to squeeze until he strangled her. Wasikapikwe, who to her killers was no longer a human being, but a harbinger of the greatest danger to her people, struggled with all her might until her strength gave out and she died. The men would later bury her in the forest. Norman admitted his part in the deed without fear. After all, he had only done what was necessary to protect everyone. He knew that any other native in his place would have done the same if necessary, and that he would have wished to go through the same and die, preserving, if only a little, of his humanity. But the agents did not see it the same way. In their eyes, this had been nothing more than cold-blooded murder. Jack and his brother Joseph were not in the group of suckers that went to the meeting on June 2nd. They were in another camp at Windy Lake. When the Fiddler brothers were approached by Agents O'Neill and Cashman at their camp, they were shocked by the accusations, but conceded to leave peacefully. After all, members of the Sucker clan, like the other natives of the cold Ontario area, did not fit the exaggerated and false stereotype of the American Indian who ambushed white men, always resentful, fierce, cruel, and eager to scalp, kill the men, take their horses, kidnap their women, and murder even the children. No, they were a peaceful people who gathered around the lake, surviving by fishing, hunting the animals of the forest, and living by principles of respecting life and spirits. The brothers were taken along with Norman Ray and his son-in-law Angus to Norway House, a local trading fort run by the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, where they would await trial. The news spread across the nation, dividing opinions as to whether the men deserved the death penalty, or whether it even made sense to convict them of breaking laws they were not even aware of. Sensationalist headlines about murder, brutalities, and devil worship, and the police charged with deliberating the case saw it more as an opportunity to gain fame and prominence than as a matter to be attended to so that justice could be done. On September 30th, 1907, Zabudo Jizhigo Guabo, leader and spiritual guide of his people, family man, leader of the Sucker clan, shaman, Ogima, and victorious hunter of over 14 Wendigos in his lifetime, escaped from captivity at Norway House during a walk in open air, only to be found hours later hanging from a tree. The evidence indicated that he had taken his own life, or maybe, just maybe, he had been the victim of corrupt abuse by his keepers, who convicted him before his trial. There is no way to know for sure. His brother, Joseph, went to the trial, where testimony revealed not only the Fiddler's successful record as hunters of these evil spirits, but also the respect and trust they received from their people who called on them whenever they suspected a case in which a close relative was in danger of falling under the influence of the dreaded cannibal spirit. The only thing the Sucker, Cranes, and other native clans around the area feared more than the insatiable Wendigo was to end up as one of these beasts, stripped of their humanity to become monstrous beings that would share nothing but despair, agony, pain, and tragedy to all those who were once their loved ones. To die as a Wendigo was as dishonorable as it was tragic, and any native of the area would gladly accept death rather than end up like that. Joseph's testimonies revealed that even one of his brothers, Peter Flett, had died after becoming a Wendigo after the group's food ran out during an expedition. The court found Joseph Fiddler guilty of the murder of Wasikapikwe and sentenced him to death by hanging. Further appeals of the case, most notably that of the superintendent of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, Gilbert Edward Sanders, who claimed that it was nonsense to condemn a man for violating laws of which he was ignorant, ended up resolving his case, declaring him innocent and free by 1909. 2 years after the trial, and, unfortunately, 3 days after his death by disease. This is how the story of the last Wendigo hunters would end. Finally, his descendants would have no choice but to accept the Canadian government. His son Robert would become leader, and the people of the Sucker clan would end up settling on the Island Lake reserves, in Manitoba. The cold, harsh forests of the east coast of the United States and Canada are the nest of spooky stories and unexplained mysteries. To many, it is nothing more than an intermittent succession of forests, lakes, icy streams, snow, fog, and nothing more dangerous than exposure to the elements and fierce wolves and bears. But to many, there is more than the shield of logic may be able to turn away. A story that is told in 1878, about 30 years before Jack Fiddler's death. A man was driven out of the Cree tribe, ending up holed up in a cabin in the middle of the woods with his family. Until one fine day he was seen wandering the populated areas looking haggard and lost. When he arrived home, he found the macabre spectacle of a cabin full of blood, with fractured, broken and empty bones all over the place. Human bones. The man defended himself by saying that the spirit of the Wendigo had possessed him. Just as happened with the Fiddler brothers in the Wasikapikwe case, many thought it was a simple case of indigenous superstitions that these natives, whom they barely looked down upon as second-class citizens and as something vaguely human, used to excuse their atrocities. For others, especially today, it is considered that, at least in the case of the Fiddlers, these were people who committed acts, albeit reprehensible, out of a sense of responsibility and duty that led them to guard and care for their people, protecting it at all costs from a natural predator, saving their people at the cost of the blood of one of their own in order to save them from a massacre at the hands of the fierce and ever-hungry Wendigo. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I know there is a ton of content out there, and I'm sincerely appreciative for you watching this right through to the end. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video and let me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. You can also let me know what type of videos you would like to see more of on this channel. That really helps me branch out into new subject matters. If you have a story you would like me to tell on this channel, please email it to me at stories@daredevril.com. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can buy me a coffee via my Ko-fi account, or simply help me out by sharing my content with anyone you might think is interested in watching it. Thanks again.